Hey y'all, welcome to the third sidebar of season 4. Well, technically it's the fourth one, but the last one was just an announcement. Anyway, karibuni. That's Swahili for welcome. I'm studying Swahili, so I've been trying to use it everywhere. But back to business. On this sidebar, we are going to cover episodes 15 through 19. But first, we got to do a recap. The last sidebar covered episodes 7 through 14. Episodes 7 through 14 were basically the Ken meets Shelonda portion of the show. Aww. Basically, Ken got kicked out of school, started selling for Rob, met Shelonda, and fell in love with Shelonda. But then he went to juvie and had that whole Sebastian beef. He got out and started leveling up with Shelonda. He cheated on Shelonda, found out Ma was smoking crack, Ma and Pops got locked up. Rob killed Lorenzo after finding out that he set Kenny up to get killed. Ken was so messed up, he snorted coke for the first time, which resulted in him going to Shelonda's house and raping her. Afterwards, he decided to break up with her because she didn't deserve the life that he lived, allegedly. And through it all, Ken failed the 10th grade for the third and final time. And now that we're caught up, let's get into it. Wait, let's not. Let's talk about something else first. Per my last unofficial sidebar, I told y'all that the platform I used to produce my podcast started tripping on me. Consequently, I'm forced to change up the way I set everything. Forced to change the way I set everything up. I'm sure y'all have noticed that some things have been different, and I'm still trying to work through the kinks. But the important thing is you're still here, and the story's still getting told. With that being said, now, let's get into this sidebar. Episode 15, Promise. Picking up from where the last sidebar left off, Kenneth raped Shelonda after snorting cocaine. He'd had that whole breakdown in the car and decided that he was going to break up with her the next day. He knew that she didn't deserve what he did to her, and she didn't deserve didn't deserve to be a part of the life that he lived. So episode 15 starts on that very next day. Lorenzo was found that next morning. Well, they knew he'd be found because they put him there. Anyway, it was a Wednesday, and that's their day. They get to the shack, and Shelonda blurts out, "We gotta talk." And everything switches gears. I want to say two things about that moment. One, I'll state the obvious first. Ken went there to break up with Shelonda that day. And by his own admission, he knew that it was probably the best decision. But in the moment, he heard her say that they had to talk, and he couldn't let her say it. In real life, one has to wonder if he would have broken up with her if he didn't feel that she was about to do it first. I know, that sounds crazy, but y'all know how people do. But for the purposes of this story, I want to believe that he really just loved that girl, in spite of it all. And even though his plan was to break up with her, his heart wouldn't let him do it. And because this is a sidebar, I want to address a secondary part of this as well. I know this is technically a different project, but I want to make sure to keep the situation in the proper perspective because this podcast gives me an amazing opportunity to be able to do that. This story is coming from Ken's perspective, so there are some things that the audience may not necessarily reflect back on, but I'm here to remind us all. All of this is taking place in Ron's shack. It's so crazy that this is happening the night after Shelonda just got raped by a boy that she loves in a place that would have to have been loaded with horribly heavy energy. Think about it. Shelonda was like 16 at the time. Ron had been taking her to that very same shack and touching on her since she was 12 years old. If this was real life, she would have to have been the strongest person ever just to be in there. But she was there. And she was allowing Ken to plead his case. In Ken's version of events, he tells her, "Baby, if you give me another chance, I promise I'll never hurt you again." Ken and Shelonda talk everything out, and she forgives him, of course. He told her that his parents were in jail, and she felt bad for him. They spend the day at the shack. And before they leave, Ken pulled out a Polaroid camera so they could take pictures. He also gives her a keepsake box and a ring, both of which belongs to his grandmother. This is not explained in the original keepsake box, so it kind of gives me an opportunity to do it here. Honestly, it probably wouldn't have made sense in any other way. I mean, where you get this stuff from? In his version, he ran to the house and got it when he went out for food. That explains how he randomly popped up with a ring and a keepsake box. It also makes it more special because it belonged to his grandma. Anywho, he gives her grandma's fake ring and told her that it was a symbol of his promise to love and protect her forever. He makes her promise the same thing. And he also made her promise that she'd always be his. He ain't say that though. But they did both agree that they were permanently and irreversibly bonded for life. Sidebar. That was supposed to be the end of that chapter, but it was kind of short. I went ahead and added the next part to it, which ended up making a really long chapter. You could kind of tell because the subject matter is really broken in half. The first short part is about Ken and Shelonda being at the shack after the rape. Then it shifts gears to the part where Ron attacked Shelonda. I tied it together by talking about how close Ken and Shelonda got after the promise. It allowed the listener/reader to see a progression in their relationship, so it didn't feel like it just jumped from the point where Ken raped her, then he went off about Ron attacking her, because that would have been weird. But let's not go too fast. After Ken and Shelonda's promise in September, they get really tight. They talk about nearly everything in their lives. So by the time December rolls around, they're basically best friends. See how that works? Ken goes to the bus stop to pick Shelonda up, and she comes running outside. She's all disheveled, and she's like, just drive. Against everything that Rob has ever told him, Ken decides that he has to take Shelonda to his house. According to Rob, women are vicious and temperamental at best. At the least, they're too emotional. And Rob's opinion on the matter gets introduced for reasons that eventually become apparent. They get to the house and Shelonda explains that Ron has attacked her. Now we, the audience that has already heard Shelonda's story, know what the catalyst for Ron's attack was. If you remember, Ron attacked Shelonda that morning because he had just found out that his wife was pregnant again, Shelonda's mama. It turned out that she was faking the pregnancy all along. But anyway, back to Ken's story. Ken asked Shelonda if Ron had ever touched her sexually. And she paused enough for him to connect the dots. Ken goes off and basically pushed Shelonda into the couch. After some gentle coaxing, she was able to calm him down enough to tell him that they hadn't had sex, but that he had been touching her inappropriately. After seeing the bruises on her body, Ken gave Shelonda some strong pills that made her go to sleep so he could go out and attack Ron. He did his business, then came back like nothing happened. When he got home, Shelonda was up cooking. Ken talks about being in awe of her because of the way that she served him, but I think that there was something bigger in play. I know, I'm a sucker for love and also for dramatics, but hear me out. The way he talks about realizing Shelonda had to go home is major. To quote, I was crushed. Why did it have to be that way? Why did she have to leave? Why did she have to go back there? Why had I been so unfortunate to have seen the possibilities? Because that's what happened, and it tormented me. I saw us in that day. The circumstances were messed up, but I could see through it. If only our lives could align. I saw us together. I saw me coming home to her. I saw her being happy to see me. I saw her cooking for me. I saw us talking over dinner. I could see that happening every day for the rest of my life. Yes, at 18. I hate that I saw it because it was right there and then it wasn't. Any expectations that I had just faded away. A couple of things. I'm so dramatic that some things get emphasized in the print version, but I need it for them to. Ken says it was right there, and the words right there are really big and in bold print. And then he says, and then it wasn't. Any expectations that I had just faded away. And in the print version, the word wasn't literally fades away. The W starts off big and then it gets smaller as it goes towards the end of the word. The reason why I did that was to capitalize on his despair. He saw it. He saw them. He saw their lives. It was right there. Then it faded. That's powerful. And you realize that at 18, this boy really just wanted the details of their lives to align, but they couldn't. He gave Shelonda a key and took her home. A few hours later, the police came. Episode 16, Jail. There's a quote at the beginning, and the listener can reasonably assume that it's from a prosecutor or somebody. They were basically like, hey, look, the facts speak for themselves. He ain't got no job, no family, he's a menace. We don't want to give him no bond. Ken had to face an actual reality. He was going to real grown man jail. And as a result, he had to deal with everything that fell out of line. He had been paying the bills at the house, so that was going to get messed up. He was saving money for Ma's lawyer. That was going to get messed up too. And he felt like Ron was probably going to make life hard for Shelonda since he knew that he had attacked him. And since we know Shelonda's story, we know that's absolutely true. Rob gets Ken a lawyer, so he gets a deal for him. He basically gets 6 months and court-mandated anger management, which I think we can all agree he needs. He goes to county to start serving his time and gets put in general population. And who does he run into? Pops. He's mad with him for a little while, but Pops basically lets it be known that Ma was dabbling on her own accord. And when Ken really thinks about it, he knows it makes sense. He decides to bury the hatchet, and it's a good thing too. Pops goes to court and gets 5 years. Ma gets 2. Ken was feeling guilty about all that because he felt like he wasted time being mad with Pops, and maybe Ma would have gotten less time if he had been out to get her a good lawyer. But things start looking up when Shelonda uses Sharon's ID to come and see him. She does that for the duration of his sentence. Sidebar. Ken doesn't know it, but we know that Shelonda hadn't simply left home. She had been kicked out after her mom found out that she was pregnant by Ron. Just a reminder, in case y'all don't remember how crazy this story is. It was celebratory for Ken, but Shelonda had really been going through it. Episode 17. That makes sense. Ken gets out and goes to Rob's. He finds out that he's getting bumped up to cocaine dealer, and the weed boy position has been given to someone named AD, who he immediately recognizes as his little brother Adrian. After talking to Hot Boy, Ken finds out that Adrian is Rob's nephew, making Celia Rob's sister. He wonders why Rob brought Adrian into the equation and excluded the knowledge that he was his little brother. Knowing that made Ken feel that he couldn't trust Rob. Ken also found out that Mac left after Lorenzo got killed, and he'd be the only cocaine dealer. Hot Boy takes Ken to his car, and they kind of have some words about Ken's decision to continue his relationship with Shelonda. Ken asks about Adrian, and Hot Boy makes it obvious that he's not his biggest fan. He gives some ominous words about him. That comes into play later down the line. I also think it's crazy that Adrian was only 14. Ain't that against some child labor laws or something? Anyway, Ken goes home and sees all the stuff that was literally still in place from the day that he attacked Ron and got locked up. I know that house had a horrible stench. He thought about everything that Hot Boy told him and felt like the only thing that was still solid was his relationship with Shelonda. Episode 18, The Plan. It doesn't exactly say, but it's insinuated. The plan was for Ken to enjoy the benefit of experiencing Shelonda while she lives with Sharon. She's free from her parents, so she can come and go as she pleases, and he doesn't have the responsibility of letting her into the parts of his life that he'd rather keep hidden. The flaw in the plan is rooted in something that is basically the story of their lives. Ken is insecure and possessive. If you think about it, his handling of Shelonda to that point had always been about insecurity and possession. When he told her that she was his girlfriend, it was rooted in the fact that he didn't want to give her an opportunity to say no. When he asked her to leave the window unlocked, it was rooted in the fact that he wanted to trick her into feeling that he could pop up at any time. He wanted to make sure that she wouldn't cheat. That was insecurity. And if you notice, he always says, Shelonda was mine. She was my girl. She wasn't going to be with anybody else. That same possession and insecurity led to the decision that Shelonda had to live with him, and that was consequential for both of them. Ken goes to see her at Sharon's, and he assesses the scene. He watches Shelonda with Antonio and Sharon. He doesn't like the fact that Sharon may have some influence over Shelonda that won't benefit him. And he doesn't like the fact that Antonio buys her things. All things considered, he might have a point about Antonio. I mean, they did end up together. But for that moment in time, Shelonda goes to live with Ken, and it was good for a little while. The flaw in the plan came when Ken had to take a ride with Rob. What he thought would be a quick trip turned into some hours. When Ken called Rob on his inconsideration, they have a falling out. But it wasn't just a falling out. Rob ripped open a wound. First, he confirmed that he had killed Hot Boy's mom. Not directly, but that whole don't talk to me about respect until you're forced to kill somebody you love thing pretty much sealed the deal. Secondly, he told him that he only gave him a chance because Kenny died and his parents weren't worth nothing. He said some curse words with his chest out in the book, though. But in the short version, it broke something inside of Ken, and he felt the loss of Kenny and his parents for the first time in a while. So once again, he decided to drink and snort some cocaine. By the time he got home, Shelonda was mad. Frustrated and high, he put his hands on her for the second time. He basically choked her out. He felt terrible the next day. He talked Shelonda out into quitting the salon so he could take care of her, and also to keep her away from other influences. Episode 19, Suffer. Ken started doing cocaine regularly after that point. Crazy thing. Seriously though, it's crazy that he didn't see the situation for what it was. He was obviously using drugs to cope, and it wasn't working for him. But he was young, and he felt like he was managing it well. I've never been on drugs, but I surmise it was just enough to make a person forget. And I guess he thought it was working for a while. He seemed to be managing. Labor Day rolls around. Ken and Shelonda decide to have something at the house. Once again, Ken went sensitive thug. He watched Shelonda as she was cooking and singing, and he thought, this is how it's supposed to be. But that didn't last long. He went from sensitive thug to cocaine snorter, and Hot Boy walked in on him. After they had some words, Ken started shutting the party down. Of course, he sees Omar leaving out of the kitchen where Shelonda was. Ken and Omar had some words, and Omar pulls a gun out. Afterwards, Ken was an emotional wreck. Of course, he took it out on Shelonda. Now, Ken didn't elaborate on it. But if you remember this from Shelonda's story, you know that was a brutal beating. That's when he pulled her hair out and kicked her with the Timberland boots on. And after that, he went from sensitive thug to just thug. Per both of their stories, we know that Ken started fighting Shelonda regularly after that point. He saw the sadness in her eyes, and he was like, dang, are we turning into Ma and Pops? No, you turning into Pops. In Ken's version of events, he went to handle some business and got surprised by the police when he got home. If you piece the stories together, you realize that that day was just as traumatic for Shelonda, maybe even more so. If you remember, that was the day she skipped school to visit her grandma, only to find out that she had not only passed away months earlier, but that her mother had taken her part of the insurance payout. She did, however, manage to walk away with the house, so she decided to call the police and have them escort her so she could get her things out and move to her grandmother's house. She had no idea about Ken's warrants and about the fact that he hadn't completed the anger management program from when he attacked Ron. Of course, he goes to jail. Like jail. And that's when we get hit from that quote, with that quote from the very beginning. You probably don't remember, but the Menace Project starts with a preface. I didn't quote the whole thing there, but it gets dropped in its entirety in this episode. Ken goes to court and addresses the judge. It's an attempt to gain leniency. He says, Your Honor, life ain't ever been easy for me, and the fact that I was hard-headed probably didn't help. From the outside looking in, it's easy to say that I should have made different decisions. And maybe I should have. But this is something that a lot of people don't realize. You don't always choose your life. Sometimes your life chooses you. I haven't always made the best decisions, but I'm not a bad guy. I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that I can be better, because I know I can. It ain't worked though. He got 6 years. And he spent the first 2 of those years solely blaming Shelonda for his predicament. The change came when he got put into a cell with old man Casper, who put the situation into perspective. He basically told Ken that he was a messed up individual. Shelonda wasn't to blame for him being there. Ken was locked up because he sold drugs, and he didn't complete his anger management program. He was selfish enough to beat her, then blame her for her need to feel safe. In a short version, Casper told Ken to leave Shelonda alone until he could be a safe space for her. And when Ken thought about it, he realized that he loved her enough to do that. Sensitive thug. That's the end of this sidebar. The next episode is titled Mia. We'll finally get a chance to see a glimpse of Ken's life without Shelonda. And good, because I am sick of talking about her. I'll let some more build up, and we'll catch up on the next sidebar with Chinney. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to follow Chinney Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like, follow, and share this podcast with your friends, family, and frenemies, because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thanks so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.